All set? Good evening. Let me call to order the regular meeting of the St. Helena City Council for March 8th, 2016. We're just back from closed session on two matters, one of which is non-reportable, one of which is reportable. With respect to the reportable action, the City Council authorized the initiation of litigation. When the complaint is filed, the names of the parties, subject matter of the litigation will be made immediately public. Now, Mr. City Attorney, did I get that roughly right?
That was exactly right. In addition to which, the complaint itself will be made available, excuse me, to the public on request.
All right. So, Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Doring, would you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Black, roll call.
Mayor Galbraith,
Here.
Vice Mayor White,
Here.
Councilmember Kroll, absent. Doring,
Here.
Pitts.
Here.
All right, the next item on our agenda is public comment. Public comment is appropriate for matters not on our agenda. We limit public comment to 3 minutes. Does anybody wish to speak at public comment? Yes.
My name is Richard Seiferheld. I live at 2020 Birch Avenue. I just wanted to comment. I attended a meeting in Napa last week at Vision 2050. I happened to see Councilman Dorning there. One of the things that was discussed at that meeting had to do with concerns about air pollution, carcinogenic type air pollution being created at the Sire Works. It just crossed my mind. I don't know whether any tracking or efforts being made locally with regard to any work done at the Harold Smith facility. I know they're breaking up a lot of old concrete and doing stuff like that. So I just, it would be encouraging to know that that's being monitored, or if it's not, that that somebody take a look at that.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the comment.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? Mr. Laidley?
I'm Wendell Laidley at 706 Hunt Avenue, St. Helena. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm going to read this to get the maximum out of my 3 minutes. On behalf of many St. Helena residents, I ask you to agendize a discussion to rezone the Hunter property behind the levee to prevent housing on a dangerous property. Public Works Director Steve Palmer correctly confirms the property meets the CEQA requirement for 100-year flood protection, and the EIR consultant likewise declares the flood risk less than significant because of the 100-year flood protection. But that 100-year flood protection is only a necessary condition. It's not a sufficient condition for anyone to approve anything in what they consider a dangerous property. So it's the responsibility for the adequacy of flood protection is exactly yours, our public elected officials. So as an engineer, I believe there's a serious flood risk behind the levee. Personally, that's just an opinion. Why might there be a flood behind a 100-year flood certified levee? Well, unlike most levees that run parallel alongside rivers, the land behind our levee is not flat and acts more like a catch basin than an unobstructed flat drainage field. That catch basin will fill quickly on levee overtopping, and the water will end up in Vineyard Valley as it has before. With global warming, the intensity and magnitude of storms are dramatically increasing. One good reason comes from a Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory paper saying that 1 degree Celsius rise in atmospheric temperature adds 6 to 7.5% of water vapor to reach equilibrium. That's 6 to 7% increased mass of water vapor in the atmosphere. An increase of 7% in water vapor means an increase in energy stored in the atmosphere by the same 7%. The same amount of sun energy to evaporate the water is then released suddenly when the water vapor condenses to liquid and falls as rain. That's where the storm energy comes, right from inside the storm itself. Our levee was aligned across the floodplain around Hunter's property. Best flood management practices would have left the floodplain intact and aligned the flood barrier around the floodplain perimeter. The floodplain storage capacity has been essentially cut in half.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laidley.
Thank you.
I must say I looked at the CEQA document for the Hunter project the other day, and it says that the design was to the 200-year floodplain with maybe 3 or 4 feet of freeboard, but I can't remember precisely the number. Just a quick comment. All right, any further public comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment. Reports by staff and city council. Ms. Phillips.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Just a couple items to update you on. For the March 22nd council meeting, I am expecting to bring the polling results before the City Council, and I know individuals were interested in that, so I wanted to let you know that that's what I'm shooting for. I'm hoping to bring it that day. And also, we're going to be having a study session on the 22nd per council direction. There'll be a community presentation on a community-based vision with regards to Lyman Park, City Hall, and Adams Street. So that's planned for March 22nd, beginning at 4:30. And a reminder for the public, on March 31st, we will now be closed for Cesar Chavez Day.
All right. Mr. Brown?
Nothing from the city either.
Ms. Bitts?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I just wanted to make everyone aware we have set our first budget workshop date for May 4th. So if everyone can put that on your calendars, that is going to be the first budget presentation to the City Council. In addition, we are going to be it's an all-day event. So we're anticipating 9 to 5. Maybe a little earlier as soon as we solidify that, and it will be at the firehouse this year. In addition to that, we are going to be putting out a community feedback survey. Last year we did a community feedback survey just to get priorities from those in the community on our budget priorities if we have any leeway in our funding, and so look for that probably within the next month. We'll be getting that out.
All right. Ms. Black? Mr. Hausch?
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing to report tonight.
Mr. Palmer?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Mr. Pitts?
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Yes.
Good.
Well, I will just follow up on MTC and ABAG have sent out a survey to all the elected officials in the Bay Area, and I would recommend that all of our council members do the survey, take the survey, and actually I spoke with Noah today, and he's full of information since you went to 2 different meetings on this. So if you have any questions or need any background, probably the most appropriate would be to go through Noah and talk with him about different positions to take.
Unfortunately, the survey comes before our next NCLOG
meeting.
Right.
where they're going to detail the various issues. So
Yeah.
But I've done the survey already, so
Okay.
one down.
Well, I've been negligent. Could you send me the survey again, please?
I believe it went directly to electeds, but I will do my best to get a copy for you.
All right.
And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, and then on March 14th, the company that's doing the survey is going to do an outreach for the North Bay region in Novato from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. on March 14th. So if anybody's interested, and I mean, one of the things about MTC and ABAG, they have operated as two separate agencies, but MTC oversees the ABAG's budget, and so there's been a conflict between the two agencies, and now they're looking at merging them. So kind of to get the rivalry or the warfare taken care of, I guess. So
Right.
should be interesting.
Right, and I think there's a concern that with the merger, that the influence of electeds in small counties may be lessened. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah,
there.
and what's interesting is in the survey, they do have some boxes to check that take that into consideration and to give some weight to it. And at the end of the survey, you can write in your opinion, and that's one of the things that you can address.
All right.
So.
All right, and as for myself, there was a meeting this afternoon of the Napa County Flood Control and Conservation District. The chief engineer, Phil Miller, gave an interesting report on the water situation in California, and it clearly is improving here in Napa County. He said all the reservoirs are spilling. That's good news. But also it seems that the very large reservoirs up north are beginning to show some signs of real life again, too. So we may not have quite the difficulty this coming water year that we had this last water year, which is not to say that conservation doesn't remain important. It's just to say that there's a degree of optimism that at least I haven't heard in the last 2 or 3 years. So let's keep hoping for those March rains. All right, consent items. The following matters are on the consent calendar. Again, any member of the council or any member of the public can ask that they be removed from the consent calendar, in which case we go through the normal process. I'm going to read them off, and don't be bashful if you want something removed. 8, consideration and proposed approval of a resolution accepting the work and directing the filing of the notice of completion for the El Bonita Avenue sewer. 9, consideration and proposed approval of a resolution approving temporary street closures on March 25th, 2016 for the RLS Parent Group and St. Helena Public Schools Foundation Run Big event, waiving the encroachment and banner permit fees totaling $300 and authorizing city staff to assist with road closures. 10, consideration and proposed approval of a resolution approving Planning Commission bylaw revisions. 11, second reading and proposed adoption of an ordinance to consider amendments to the City of St. Helena Municipal Code, Chapter 2.52, concerning the Board of Library Trustees. 12, second reading and proposed adoption of an ordinance to consider amendments to City of St. Helena Municipal Code, Section 17.8.180, 16.24.060, and 16.24.100, establishing a uniform 14-day appeal period. 13, consideration and proposed approval of a resolution accepting an addendum to the initial study/mitigated negative declaration for Las Alcobas Hotel project at 1915 Main Street. Does anybody wish any of those to be pulled? Chair would invite a motion to accept the consent calendar.
So move to approve items 8 through 13 on the consent calendar.
Second.
Ms. Black?
Vice Mayor White?
Here.
Councilmember
Yes.
Doring?
I'm here too,
Still
yes.
here.
Pitts?
Barely.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. New business, item 14, grant quarterly report for fiscal year 2016 quarter 2, which would be, I guess, October 1st through December 31st. That would be quarter 2, right?
Yes,
Ms. Prokowski? Yes, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here tonight to present the Grants Quarterly Report for the second quarter of the fiscal year, which was, as the Mayor just mentioned, from October to December of last calendar year. Staff spent the majority of this time performing the analysis on the Comprehensive Flood Control Project, for which an initial report was presented to the Council in January. No new grant applications were submitted during the second quarter. However, the city is still waiting on results for 2 grant applications for the Upper York Creek Dam Removal and Ecosystem Restoration Project. A decision on those grants is expected within the next few months, as the guidance indicated spring 2016 as the award timeframe. In addition, as the Community Development Director mentioned at a previous meeting, the city was not part of the initial round of funding for the home grant. However, we have been notified that if additional funds are allocated, our application may be funded. For grants management, staff also submitted required reports to the Friends and Foundation of the St. Helena Library and 2 current grants also for the Upper York Creek Dam Removal Project. Staff also partnered with the Police Department to ensure proper procurement for our Citizens Options for Public Safety grant. This is a short report again because the flood project was discussed in detail during January, and that comprised the bulk of staff's time. I'll have much more to report in a few weeks when I bring to you the 3rd quarterly report. As such, staff's recommendation is to receive and file this report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there,
I have one question. Are there any grants that we wish we had acted on that we didn't have bandwidth or time to act on because of the comprehensive flood control project analysis usurping all of your time?
It's a very good question, Councilman. However, since the bulk of my time was spent doing the analysis on the flood control project, I didn't even have time to research what those potential opportunities might have been. Therefore, I don't have an answer for you.
Okay.
all right. Let me ask one question here. With respect to the Upper York Creek Dam removal, we have $2 million pending. Is that the remaining funding that would be required to move forward, or is there still additional funding that's required?
Actually, our current estimates is that we're approximately $1.5 million short. So right now we have a pending a little more than what it would take. So if we won both, we could actually reallocate some of the bonds that the city has to another project.
All right, very good.
And all of that $2 million can be allocated towards what we actually need to use it for the removal?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Oh, are we asking tough questions? Okay, let me, why don't you sit down and let me open the public hearing, and does anybody wish to speak at public hearing on this item? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Is there any further questions from council?
No.
Then I just suggest that we have read the report and we receive it, so thank you very much. All right, that takes us to our next item, 15. Consideration of proposed approval of a resolution authorizing a grant request to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, affectionately known as the MTC, for the allocation of fiscal year 2016-2017 Transportation Development Act Article 3 pedestrian/bicycle project funding in the amount of $51,500 for 88 curb ramps on Railroad Avenue. And then with respect to this, under recommended action, there's a date change. It's for the 2016-2017 fiscal year and not the 2015-2016 fiscal year, if I have that correctly.
Yes.
Ms. Prokowski, I guess you're up again.
I am. Thank you, Mayor. The city is submitting a grant application for the Transportation Development Act Article 3 program, that's affectionately known as TDA 3, in the amount of $51,500 for the design and construction of ADA curb ramps on Railroad Avenue between Fulton and Hunt. There is $151,870 available for all of the jurisdictions in Napa County for projects that fund a wide range of items for both bicycles and pedestrians. I'd like to point out that this grant application is a great example of staff collaboration and finding solutions. In September, the council rejected all bids for the 2015 pavement rehabilitation project due to its high cost. At that time, Public Works Director Palmer committed to evaluating the curb ramp project as a standalone project. After that analysis was completed and it was determined that the project could be completed separately, staff began to identify grants to move the curb ramp project forward. This TDA grant is a good match for the project. The new Railroad Avenue ADA curb ramp project will remove and replace 6 existing curb ramps. Photographs of those curb ramps are included at the back of the staff report. The grant application is requesting $51,500 in funds, and the city will be providing a $10,000 cash match, which is already budgeted through our 5-year capital improvement plan. If awarded, the grant will fund the design, environmental, construction management, inspection, and contingency for the project. In other words, the entire project. Any grant funds would be available in July 2016, and the project will take about a year to complete. Once the curb ramps are upgraded, the microsurfacing of Railroad Avenue can be scheduled. As such, staff is recommending that the council approve the resolution to authorize the grant application in the amount of $51,500. Interestingly enough about this grant, it actually flows through the Napa Valley Transportation Agency. I hope I got their new name right. And so, Authority. Thank you, Vice Mayor White. As such, those of you who sit on the board will likely see this grant application come before you as part of that decision-making process. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on the grant application.
And believe me, we don't intend to recuse ourselves either.
Fantastic.
We will fight hard for this one.
Any additional questions from council? Let me open the public hearing on this one. Does anybody wish to comment at public hearing? I'll close the public hearing. Any further questions of Ms. Bukowski? Chair would entertain a motion then to, let's see, let me take a look here, what we're supposed to accept the recommended action as proposed by staff. How's that?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Black?
Councilmember Doreen,
Yes.
Vice Mayor White,
Yes.
Councilmember Pitts,
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith.
Yes. Okay. Next item, 16, consideration and approval of a resolution adopting the City Council 2016 strategic objectives. Ms. Phillips, you're lead staff on that, although there's a bit of deja vu in this one.
Yes, there is. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We're working on the feedback right now. I think several of you can hear it, so we're trying to dial that down a little bit. On February 11th, 2016, the council met in a special meeting that we referred to as the goal-setting session. It was a day-long session where council had the opportunity to hear presentations from staff, as well as have a discussion about goals for 2016. Trying to get me plugged in here. So as part of that discussion and the outcome that was anticipated as part of the goal setting was to identify goals for the City Council, and those goals then, are used by staff in preparation of the 16-17 budget. It helps guide our work and our prioritization and our decision making as we prepare a budget for Council's consideration on May 4th. I just wanted to go over what our goals were for 2015, just as a reminder that in addition to adding goals and looking towards the 16-17 budget, staff continues to work on the vast majority of the goals that were presented for us in 2015. So we were looking at long-term revenue options, which we've been doing very studiously over the past months, including the Revenue Source Task Force. We did hire a consultant to initiate the fee changes, so to look at all of our fees within the city. That work is starting to begin. We are doing an assessment of our water and wastewater rates, and that work is underway. The consultant's been hired, and that work is underway. We are reviewing our infrastructure needs and trying to identify what costs are associated and where our deficiencies are and what sort of revenues we need and what kind of revenues are available outside of maybe grants and things that Ms. Prokosky talked about and sort of what improvements need to occur and how we do those things in the years ahead. To continually update the long-range financial forecast, which we've done on a regular basis. And the last one was to hire an economic development manager or director. Council authorized that position. It was funded for the 14-15 budget, but as a result of the $1 million in reductions that we needed to identify to balance the 15-16 budget, that position was left unfunded, so we have not accomplished that goal. So for the goals for 2016, this is paraphrasing to the best of my ability based on our conversation. And so the reason I bring this back to you is the opportunity to look at the things that we talked about, to wordsmith, to change, to modify, to add, to delete any of the goals or information that we discussed that I've articulated into or paraphrased into these three goals. And so from what I heard from the day-long discussion and what the facilitator basically narrowed it down to were three goals. Number one being maintain our quality of life by sustaining and enhancing revenues. Number two is maintain a functional and safe city by supporting and maintaining city staff. And then number 3, manage workloads and dedicate adequate resources for proper project management. And I think the flood control project's an excellent example of really needing proper project management, and I think we've all learned that lesson together. And so we certainly appreciate council's support, not only in maintaining our staff and supporting our staff, but also in the recognition that quality project management is an essential public administration skill, and that you value that in our organization, and that's very important to us. And so those were the 3. I did receive some communications from Councilmember Doring. He provided a suggested summary vision statement and asked me to provide that to the council and the community this evening. And so I've done that, and I'll read it to you very briefly. The City of St. Helena will be an economically sustainable, family-friendly, diverse, and safe community which has prudently managed its financial and human resources, substantially improved its aging infrastructure, ensured its water security, provided a full range of housing, business, cultural, and recreational opportunities, and retains a unique and small town character, beautiful natural environment, and high quality of life. So I provide that for you at the request of Councilmember Doring. I'm here to answer any questions, and this is really the conversation for the council to give us final direction on your goals so that we can then march forward and prepare the 16-17 budget.
All right. Are there any initial questions of staff? Let me open the public hearing. Anybody wish to comment at public hearing? Then I'll close the public hearing and invite council discussion. Mr. Doring, do you want to lead off?
Well, I don't really have a whole lot to say about the substance of the goals. I do think that we can't just sort of not think about the goals that we've developed in the past, so I thought it was important that we continue those goals. I actually think that the 2015 goals should be included as a sort of a continuing item and not separated necessarily from the 2016 goals, that they should all be taken together with maybe some minor revisions to say we're going to continue to do the things that we've been doing in 2015 and then add the 2016 goals as part of the resolution. With respect to the vision statement, I've been trying to make the case that I think if we keep our eye on the overall big picture vision when we're thinking about these issues, then it's easier for us to make the case when we do our budget hearings and we're talking about our goals, that we can link them back to the reason we are even here doing the work we're doing. So this, there's no ownership in this. I actually just took words from folks from that meeting, and I tried to incorporate as many of the ideas that I heard from my fellow council members. I don't know where this would go. It's just something to keep in mind, sort of the broader, bigger picture. And again, the words are not perfect and they could be changed, but I think if we start from that big picture vision, then when we're doing our budget sessions, we can always go back, how does this fit? How does this fit? How does this fit to what we're doing as a city? Then I think it's more meaningful, and it kind of keeps us on task. So that was the purpose of that exercise. I don't know what we want to do with it, where it should be incorporated. Should it be put on our website? Should it be used in some more formal way? I don't know. That's maybe for another day, but that's the reason I did that.
Sure.
I don't disagree with all of that. Sorry. I don't disagree with all of that. I think our 3 goals that we came up with this year kind of do incorporate what we had for the year before, and I think it's maybe even a little bit higher level rather than the specific things that we tried to get done in 2015 but didn't have the wherewithal to do it. Got a lot of it done, but I think the economic manager, assistant manager should still be on our radar when we can afford to take that into consideration. And thank you for putting together a pretty succinct statement. I think if we can find a place to put it in somewhere, it'll be a good thing to just keep our eye on.
I agree with my fellow council members in terms of incorporating the 2015 goals into our current set. Almost all of them are things we are continuing to work on or need to continue to work on, some in perpetuity. I really like this vision statement. I've been looking at it, thinking about, instead of phrasing it in a way that's forward-looking, or let's look back, in the future at what we did and what we accomplished, could we recraft it to read more along the lines of the city of St. Helena? And maybe we aren't all these things today, right? But strives to be or is, and then, so on and so forth. And, prudently manages its financial, right? Let's not make it in the future. Let's make it today. And so we are, forced to live up to it today. And, continually improves its aging infrastructure, ensures its water security, provides a full range. I think if we change that tense, I think it could be even better, but great work on this, Paul.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate the nuanced perspective, because I cheated a little bit, because it's really a combination of a mission statement and a vision statement.
Right.
They're two different processes. I was trying to incorporate them, and it was difficult to have the right language. I was trying to say, well, where will we be in the future? But I agree with you. These are also the things that we need to be doing now to get to the future. So it's a combination of both.
Yeah, and so instead of retained, we protect our unique small town character.
That's
right?
fine.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's
national
fine.
environment. And then it's a statement of who we are and what we do every day.
And this may be the subject of another agendized item, so that we go through this exercise. I want it to be a tool for us to use, so that when we're making decisions on a day-to-day basis, we kind of have in mind, oh yeah, I see how that's linked to the reason we exist.
Well, I think there's something like this, maybe not exactly this, but something like this in the preamble of the general plan.
Okay.
And the community, the greater community, spent some time thinking about, and this touches on most of them, what are the important sort of bullet points that we want to encapsulate in that mission statement.
Right.
I like it.
Thank you for your comment.
Here's what I would suggest. I think we're all in agreement with respect to the 2016 objectives that you set forth. I think we're all in agreement that we're continuing forward with respect to the 2015 objectives. And then with respect to the vision statement, my suggestion would be that we send it back to Council Member Doring after hearing this evening's comments.
Send it back to Council Member.
No. Send it back to you. Tinker with it and bring it back next time.
Send me your comments.
I'll help you with it.
Okay.
Okay. So that I don't want the City Council under my mayorship to be engaged in wordsmithing. Quite frankly, it's not a productive use of time. So, if that's okay, then I would seek a motion that we approve the 2016 resolution with its statement of strategic objectives, noting that we're also bringing forward the 2015 objectives as well.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Black?
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Pitts?
Yes.
Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. And then further work from two members of the council. Mm-hmm. Okay. That takes us to informational item 17, review of additional revenue options, including parcel tax, payroll tax, and gross receipts tax. This came about because at our goal-setting session, there was some suggestion that perhaps the council hadn't focused sufficiently on these taxes in the past. Without getting to whether that's so or not so, council directed city staff to come back with some more information with respect to them, and so that's Ms. Phillips.
Thank you. Good evening again. So just to qualify, what I did was provide some basic information to help the council better understand what these three taxes were. And my intent was not to spend a tremendous amount of staff time digging in and getting all the information, but to provide a high-level overview of them. And then if council had interest in any or all of the three items, that they could direct staff to come back with a more detailed staff report for council's consideration. So this is just a very high-level overview. So first, there were three taxes that council asked staff to come back with. More information on is the parcel tax, a payroll tax, and a gross receipts tax. So let me start first with a parcel tax. Parcel taxes are a form of property tax, and they can be imposed by local government, and that it comes through a majority vote of the people, and it's on a per parcel basis. So because parcel taxes are for specific uses or as a specific special use, it must be passed through a 2/3 vote. There is no majority vote, majority plus one vote for a parcel tax. And it is not based on the value of the property and has been determined to be legal under Prop 13. So Prop 13 is, our property tax is based on the value of the property. Parcel taxes are a set amount. So regardless of the value of the property, everyone pays the same set amount. There are different ways there are several different types of parcel taxes. Some of the most common being a levy that's based on the existence of a parcel. It can be a flat levy. There's some very complicated equations or calculations that can be used to determine a parcel tax, and then you can also tax per acre. So there's some options in there depending upon the interest of the agency imposing the parcel tax. In California, between 2003 and 2014, there were 800 parcel tax measures that were placed before the voters, and about 56 passed and 44 failed. The average parcel tax from the research that I did for cities is around $60. For school districts, it's around $96, and for special districts, it's about $68. Again, this is just a high-level average. The city of St. Helena currently has 2,433 parcels. And therefore, for example, if the city imposed a $100 parcel tax, we would generate $243,000 annually through the parcel tax. A payroll tax, there are two types of payroll taxes. One is the one that we're more used to, and those are our deductions that are taken from Social Security and income tax that we all pay. And a second payroll tax is an employer-based tax on the employee's wages. I was unable to find any cities in California other than the city county of San Francisco that's imposed a payroll tax. Doesn't mean it's not out there, but I wasn't able to find any others than the city county of San Francisco. They passed that tax in 1970 and actually have in 2012 recalled or have decided to phase out that payroll tax and have instead put in a gross receipts tax. I'm not able to estimate how much revenue the city could receive if it imposed a payroll tax, and I don't know if the city even has, as a general law city, the authority to impose a payroll tax, because there's no way for me to know the payroll amounts for the businesses in the city of St. Helena, so I have no way of estimating what those amounts could be. The third one is a gross receipts tax. This is a tax on the total gross revenues of a company. And this is taxing all sales of the businesses. And so this is often referred to as tax pyramiding, because every action that a company has is then taxed. So if it buys something, it's taxed on that. When it sells something, it's taxed on that. And again, there's no way for staff to know the gross receipts of all the businesses in St. Helena, so it's not possible for me to estimate the amount of revenue that could come from imposing a gross receipts tax. The only place I was able to find a gross receipts tax, just a general tax, was the city of LA and the county and city of San Francisco again. Although many cities in California use a gross receipts tax for a tiered system in their business licenses. The city of St. Helena does not do that. We do have a flat tax, and then there is a small increase based on number of employees, but not a gross receipts tax. And again, I'm not familiar with how to implement this. I don't know if a general law city even has the authority to do so. Significant additional research would need to be done on both the payroll tax and the gross receipts tax if council were interested in continuing the discussion on these items. And I'm happy to answer questions that you might have.
All right, are there any initial questions of staff with respect to the parcel tax, payroll tax, or gross receipts tax? Those are the only taxes that are relevant this evening. We're not going to be discussing other taxes.
So I have one general question. Are any of these approaches limited in terms of how they could be used? Could they go towards the general fund? Could we allocate them towards specific uses if we thought that was appropriate? That's number one. Number 2, on the gross receipts tax, I've heard a lot of discussion over the years about how any wine that's sold and shipped out of state, the sales tax is paid somewhere else, and we don't get the benefit of that. So would GRT apply to wine sales as well, where the shipping is occurring and the sales tax is being paid elsewhere?
I don't know the answer to either of those.
Mr. Brown?
Well, I can answer in the context of business license taxes based on gross receipts, and typically the rule is it's applicable to all cities. Is that taxes have to be apportioned such that taxes that are attributable to extraterritorial activity, the tax receipts are not attributable then to the local jurisdiction. So there's an apportionment process that goes on. All cities do that, at least in the context of their business license taxes. In answer to the question about whether general law cities do have the authority, generally there's a provision in the government code that says general law cities have the same taxing authority as charter cities. That's not the case, obviously, with real property transfer taxes, which is why we were looking at a charter city measure. But so as to both those taxes, general law cities such as St. Helena do have that authority to impose that. And finally, the answer to your question is with respect to whether the council can or whether the tax can be used for specific purposes, it always can be. To the extent that it must be, then the tax becomes a special tax subject to a 2/3 vote requirement.
Okay, so, but like the parcel tax is a 2/3 vote requirement anyway, right?
Right.
Okay, but if we tried to do any of these others, then it would become 2/3 if we wanted to specify what the tax would be used to fund.
It should also be known that the council should also be aware that with respect to a payroll tax, it is something that is, you have to be a little careful, as with all these, as to how you draft them, because it is illegal for cities to try to impose income taxes, such as what the state imposes. And so it's how the tax is characterized and written is important. It is done. It's not done. It's not a common tax, as the manager pointed out. San Francisco has long had one. Oakland had one, and there was a source of litigation years ago. I believe they have since abandoned or repealed that tax.
All right. Any further initial questions? Let me open this up to public comment. But again, please keep in mind that the only taxes that we can appropriately address this evening would be the payroll, the parcel tax, the payroll tax, and the gross receipts tax. Anybody wish to speak to any of those three?
Hi, Doug Barr, 2480 Spring Mountain Road. Just like to encourage you to take a good hard look at the payroll tax. It's I know it's not common, but that necessarily doesn't mean we shouldn't look at things that aren't common for our town. We should look at everything that makes sense here, and if we're the first ones to do it, then we become a paradigm for other small towns that may find that this is useful. The reason I think the payroll tax, that is the payroll tax when the business pays a tax for their employees, it's not taking it out of the pockets of the employees, is valuable because it puts the onus of those people who are making the most profits, that's the biggest businesses in town, and you could forgive the first few employees to make it not so onerous to the small businesses, but only to the bigger businesses. They're the ones who make the most profits, and they do the most damage to our infrastructure, which is what we're trying to repair here. So it seems to me that these bigger businesses that have trucks that come in and out of town carrying groceries, they're carrying gravel, they're carrying wine barrels, they're carrying bulk wine, they're carrying grapes, do a lot of damage to our roads. We know that 3.5 million tourists come through town and stop in tasting rooms, and that does a lot of damage to our traffic situation. We know that they have low-wage earners in a lot of these businesses, and that means that people coming into town also dealing with traffic. And so it seems to me that clearly these businesses do far more damage to our streets, our sewers, our traffics, and our quality of life than all of the 5,900 people in town put together. And so maybe we should look at them paying more of their fair share of the taxes than the general residents of the town. I know that San Francisco is probably the only city that's made this payroll tax, but we do have one example, so we can take a look at the way they did it. They, in fact, generated $400 million last year on their payroll tax, and they're not phasing it out because it doesn't work. They're phasing it out because they want to put on a new tax, which is a more potent tax, a total gross revenue tax, so they can make even more money from those businesses. I know it's hard to guesstimate without knowing how many employees these different businesses have in town, but there aren't so many of them that it seems an impossible task to find out and make some kind of a guesstimate. We make guesstimates on TOT all the time, and they become gospel, so it might be worth the trouble to look at that. Administering the tax, well, we tax business licenses. That's a tax, as you were pointing out. We send out a letter and we get the revenues back. I don't know why we couldn't put in some sort of a form that's self-accounting, in which they tell us how many employees they have that year and how much they're going to pay. We tell them how much they're going to pay per, and then we just audit that once in a while. But I'm sure with our staff, there can be good ideas figured out about how to administer it. And finally, I don't doubt for a minute, I know these are the complaints, that the local business will fight this vehemently, because who wants to give up a free ride? But basically, they're getting a free ride. So we ought to take a good, hard look at this before we just dismiss it. And finally, just let me say in closing, the businesses that may vehemently oppose this make up about 4% or less of the voters in St. Helena. The other 95 or 96%, if you put this on a ballot, are going to have the more potent voice, as they should.
Thank you.
Jeff Ellsworth, 1434 Sylvaner, speaking for Citizens Voice. We also support looking further into the parcel tax. Even though it has to be passed by a 2/3 vote, we believe that if the citizens understand the benefits of it, that they could support it. We also think that it will help restore trust in town, because this tax, or any tax, I guess, that has a 2/3 vote, can have a stipulation about where those funds are used, and can't, or doesn't get commingled with other funds. So if people saw exactly where their money was going and it was determined what for, I think that people would be supportive. And that could be looked at as a building block for maintaining infrastructure, and a building block for just making sure that people know that the community has the protection that we want. And it gives us the comfort as things move forward that will be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Richard Seiferhell, 2020 Birch Avenue. Just a couple of questions and comments. I'm kind of at a loss as to why the Revenue Committee, the Ad Hoc Revenue Committee, didn't look at some of the taxes that we're discussing here this evening. I mean, they seem like obvious revenue-raising sources, and I thought that committee was supposed to basically be looking at all sources of possible revenue. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and again, I'm no expert in this, but in doing some research, the California Tax Association references cities and municipalities throughout the state that have various non-Mello-Roos tax initiatives or approved ways of funding things, such as tax improvement associations, sidewalks installation tax, and road maintenance as special taxes. I mean, it seems to me these are all various, especially useful, possibly useful ways of funding the infrastructure, the road infrastructure. I would like some consideration given to that. And then just lastly, with regard to Jennifer Phillips' report, it seems that understanding how these things are implemented, I understand we can't necessarily come up with an estimate of the revenue, but if the City Council is looking at all of this, I think you really have to understand how these various taxes are implemented, how easily they could be implemented, whether you have the authority to do it, or whether we have to have a vote registered voters in the city to implement them, but I think that's something that needs to be looked into further than we've gone so far.
Thank you very much. Any further public comment?
Thank you.
Good evening. Pam Simpson with St. Helena Chamber of Commerce. Obviously, the payroll tax would be a very difficult tax for the businesses in St. Helena. First of all, to address the situation that the businesses are not paying their fair share. As we all know, there's 4 ways to get money in the city of St. Helena: property tax, sales tax, TOT, and impact fees. And the biggest payers of all of that is business. So when you say that business isn't paying their fair share, they're paying more than their fair share. They're paying more than a lot of the residents. So that's inaccurate, and it's ridiculous to say that they're not paying their fair share. The businesses in this town also give back immensely to the community in different ways. We've gotten a park built because of nonprofits, and those nonprofits got their money from businesses. So again, inaccurate to say that the businesses aren't paying. I think that something like a payroll tax, there's a good reason why it's not being used and not around in a lot of the California cities, and it's because it doesn't work. You can't keep taxing your businesses. It just doesn't promote economic sustainability. Just doesn't keep your businesses in business. Somebody like, I can mention Goose and Gander, some of these places on Main Street are not going to be able to do this. What this does is this kills jobs. There's going to be people who will not be able to afford to hire a couple more people, and it will keep them from doing that. The chamber, for example, we've got 3 full-time people, 2 part-time. If there was a payroll tax and I had to pay something like that, that's a full-time person gone. So it's an immediate, quick, fast way to really shut a business down. So we would oppose a payroll tax. We would not be in favor of anything of the sort, and we think that the ad hoc task force looked at that and said you can't tax your way out of this. There's got to be a full package, including some TOT that comes from this. We've already looked at the 2 taxes, the sales tax and the property transfer tax, which the chamber's more than willing to look at and consider, because we know that the city needs this kind of revenue. But to distract us from what the ad hoc task force has done at this point is just a delay tactic, and we feel like we should move ahead with what the report of the ad hoc task force did. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further public comment? I'll close the public hearing and invite council discussion.
So all of these, just a question first, all of these taxes require a vote of the citizens, correct? We've done that.
Yes, that's
research.
correct.
Okay. Look, my initial comments are that whichever, and we can't talk about the other taxes, we can only talk about these three tonight. Whichever ones we choose, we need to choose very carefully. If we choose too many, it's gonna bite us. And I think the choices and what the ad hoc revenue committee came up with are good choices that we should continue to opine on. I think the payroll tax is challenging. While I can see both arguments and both sides of it, it's something that clearly isn't used very much anywhere. And it's probably for good reason. As to the GRT, I'm not sure I'm fully clear, and I'd like to ask you again, Tom, to explain how that would work for, is there a real, potential windfall? And that's my other concern with these, is it's really hard to say let's do something when we can't estimate what it's actually going to generate. We have no idea on the payroll or I guess the GRT right now. It's difficult to predict, and it's hard to endorse something that we really can't get our arms around or don't have our arms around yet in terms of the potential fiscal impact. So I'm a little bit at a loss. On the parcel tax, I would say that, and I want to compare it to a transfer tax because it relates to property value and just simply put, having to pay something every year, right, over and over again versus when you sell something are psychologically 2 very different things. And I'll leave it at that because I know we're not supposed to talk about what's not on this list. But the parcel tax, I think, is to me seems a little bit more challenging And frankly, I think it would take a while to figure out what's the formula we're going to use, what's the right formula, what's the fair formula. Is it based on square footage of improvements? Is it based on acreage? You know, how are we really going to structure that? I think that might take a lot of time to thoughtfully put together, and I don't know that we have that amount of time right now in preparation for, you know, a November ballot.
Mr. Doring?
I have nothing brilliant to add to the discussion. I kind of agree. There's not a whole lot of information. I'm wondering if the state maintains some of the information that we're looking for, either through the State Board of Equalization or the State Department of Finance, some general estimates of what the city generates, what its businesses generate in total income, or what the payroll is, those kinds of things. Somebody has to maintain that data somewhere. And do we have access to it?
So again, all I wanted to do was provide you with basic information before I invested a tremendous amount of staff time. I'm certain that we would conduct far more detailed research. We put a tremendous amount of staff time to make sure that we understood one or whichever ones of these taxes you'd be interested in bringing, and we would bring a full comprehensive staff report forward. But without knowing that you had any interest at all, it didn't seem like a good investment in staff time, basically mine, to go and do all this extensive research if the council had no interest. If you have interest, you absolutely can direct me, and we would bring back detailed staff reports on one or any of these. I'm happy to do that, but I didn't want to do that without knowing that you had interest.
Okay. Mr. White?
Having sat through all but 2 of the ad hoc committee meetings, and I think it was very extensive, and staff provided the committee with a lot of different information, and I think, you know, if the citizens were really interested in bringing this forward, they should have brought it forward while the ad hoc committee was meeting, and it wasn't brought forward until we had our goal setting session. So I look at this as more of a distraction from the items that were chosen and vetted very extensively, and I think we should move forward with. I mean, we're going to hear at our next meeting what the survey came out with, and I don't want to make any decisions or distract staff on these items until after we've heard, you know, what the survey is, and I'm inclined to concentrate on those items that we've already vetted and move forward and not get waylaid over with these other taxes. I think, you know, if we're just going to bombard everybody with all these different tax ideas, we're going to have a backlash, I think, with our community, and say, you know, are we going to get taxed to death? And I would agree with Pam on you know, our businesses are what sustain this town and bring revenue in, and also provide jobs. I mean, without having the jobs available in town, all the working people that work here and live here, which there's quite a few, you know, if those businesses go away, then they have to commute out of town to get jobs. And I mean, a lot of people who work at Harold Smith live here in town. A lot of people who work at J. Davies live here in town. And I think we need to be cognizant of that and to be sensitive towards that. So.
Well, my comments are as follows. With respect to the parcel tax, to me, the very interesting statistic is that we have 2,433 parcels, and if we imposed $100 parcel tax per parcel, it would generate $243,000 annually. It just doesn't do anything for us. To do anything for us, by my calculation, you'd be talking between $500 and $1,000 per parcel per year. We have a lot of people on fixed incomes here in this town, and I don't think there's any way that we could generate the political support for a parcel tax given the fact that our residents are aging and so many are on fixed incomes. And so I don't see politically that it's a practical tax. It would require a 2/3 vote as well. And then with respect to the payroll tax, I think it's an extremely interesting idea. My problem with it is, as others have pointed out, that there's only one city that we know of that's actually imposed the tax. And these are very complicated taxes, and if we were to go down that road, I am confident that it would take a significant tax department to review it and enforce it. City of San Francisco's got real scale. We don't. I'm also extremely sensitive to the comments that I've heard from any number of folks in the business community that they would resist the tax and they view it as a job killer. I'm not an entrepreneur, but I listen carefully to what folks say, and I don't think we can go forward with a tax that would be so overwhelmingly opposed by our business community. And that would be true of both the payroll tax and the gross receipts tax. And again, I don't want to stray into the other taxes, but at least there's a glimmer of hope that we could find broad support, including in the business community, for one or the other of the other taxes. So that's my analysis of it. Is there any further discussion?
I just have one or two more comments. I think on the parcel tax, it doesn't necessarily have to be, $100 per parcel flat across the board. You can create a formula, it just can't be based on value. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. But that aside, I agree. I think it's a really politically challenged tax. And on the payroll tax and really anything that affects business, I think it's really important to remember that we do have tourists coming here and spending money. Why are they coming here? It's not because they're staying here because we don't have that many good hotel rooms. They're coming here because there's interesting shopping. And the last thing I want to do is cause 20 or 25%, of the businesses that are interesting to have to shut down, both for locals and for tourists coming. And so I think, without, again, having no idea on what the impacts could be, to me, it just seems like a very bad path to go down at this point. If we had more information in the future, we could look at it. If there is a way to exempt certain businesses, whatever that means, from such a tax, we could look at it. I just don't think we have the time or the bandwidth to do that right now, and we should stay focused on the other choices we've come up with.
Any further comments? I think we're not going to take any more of your time on these taxes at this point in time. It's not to say that you might not be back on the hook in the future, but for the moment, you're off the hook.
I do want to add that I think it's important that we had this discussion and did look at these, whether it was raised to the ad hoc or not. Someone brought it up after the fact, and while it would have been better if it were brought up then, which I agree with Peter, I think it's our obligation and duty to look at it now, and I'm glad we've had this conversation. So thank you.
My memory is they certainly looked at the parcel tax.
Okay.
And my assumption is that they didn't look at the other two taxes because they just aren't generally adopted in California City. So it's a real outlier to go down that road. And wow, I certainly feel if we were ever to look at this that we would want to see what had happened to other communities, small communities that have adopted such a tax. I would never be in favor of being the leader on this one. What can I say? All right, very good. But in any event, I agree. It was very good to have this discussion, and I appreciate the community coming forward and causing us to have a further discussion of these taxes. So that takes us to our next item. Consideration and proposed approval of a resolution approving a new unrepresented compensation program that covers all city employees not represented by an employee group. Ms. Phillips.
Thank you very much. This will be my last one tonight.
This is first of all, this is one where we couldn't be more proud of our city employees. But secondly, it's also for the rest of the world quite a bureaucratic point.
Yes, it is.
And you love bureaucracy.
We love bureaucracy. And again, one of those things that is important for the health and stability of the organization, which then further, with quality employees and employees that feel secure in their positions and are provided the benefits that representative employees receive, we maintain our staff, which is one of your goals, and thereby we can deliver those services in a high quality fashion that the community and the council are seeking. So yes, a bit bureaucratic, but very important. It's important to recognize those who are not represented by union representation or considered unrepresented. And currently we have two groups, and that's our executive management as well as our mid-managers. And so what's best practices now in local government is to provide those individuals also with some sort of compensation program so that they know their minimum compensation that they have a right to, and that there's no confusion between the council and the city manager and then those that are unrepresented. So when conversations occur in negotiations, that everything then is in writing and everyone's clear on the type of compensation that's provided to both of these groups. So currently the city has two represented groups. That's the St. Helena Employees Association and the St. Helena Police Officers Association. And when we conduct negotiations with both of those groups, sometimes enhancements are provided. A good example recently was we just finished negotiations with the St. Helena Employees Association, and we changed a benefit that was in favor of the employees, and that was changing a half-day Good Friday to a full day off for Cesar Chavez Day. And so we want to make it clear that that kind of a benefit enhancement is also provided to the mid-managers and the executive staff, and that there's no misunderstanding that it's a day off for represented employees and for some reason that unrepresented employees would then be expected to show up for work. So it helps provide clarity. In addition, compression becomes an issue. So as you have employees that are in those two represented groups and they receive raises over a period of time, at some point you start to have compression if the unrepresented employees are also not provided consistent or similar types of raises. And so we also want to be able to take care of unrepresented employees as well, and they don't have an opportunity to bargain or negotiate. And so this program then ensures that they too are included in negotiations that occurred with our represented groups.
Can you explain what compression means?
Compression means that as a certain level of employees, if they're given, let's say, 4% raises every year, and your managers don't receive those raises, at some point your represented employees are making more than your managers.
Okay. So everyone's compressing together in terms of their earnings.
Correct. And there should be, in business as well as in government, there should be a separation.
Thank you.
And so in addition to the two groups that we have currently, a third group, so we're talking about the executive management and the mid-management, the Myers-Milius-Brown Act has a definition of confidential employee, and they are to be put in a separate group because they are often involved in confidential matters, including negotiations. And so that's never been created for the city of St. Helena. And so through this program, we're also recommending the creation of the confidential unit, and that would include the human resources analyst, which was a position that I mentioned in the staff report a few weeks ago that was being downgraded from a manager position. This person would have confidential information with regards to individual salaries and benefits and health care and things like that. The senior management analyst in finance, who also has access to payroll and confidential information, and the city clerk. This is a very normal course of business and occurs throughout the state of California, and so we're setting that up with this program, as well as those individuals are compensated an additional 3% to their base salary for this additional work and confidentiality. Basically what we did when we put this program together, this resolution, is we took all of our existing practices, whether it's through contracts that have been provided to the executive staff or just understandings that have occurred. What normally happens when a mid-manager is hired here in the city of St. Helena is they're provided a letter that says, congratulations, we've selected you, yay, we can't wait till you come on board, and here's sort of a general list of benefits. It's very informal. It doesn't really give the mid-managers a clear understanding of what their full benefits are and how those are really guaranteed to them because it's a sheet that, from what I can tell, has never even gone to council. It's sort of been compiled over the years. And so this tells someone coming into our organization, yes, you're guaranteed these sets of benefits. And so that's what we did, is we followed current business practices, but there were two areas that I did want to highlight to ensure that council and the community understood that two changes were being made from our current practice. And one of those was under the salary adjustment. And so with the SHIA, St. Helena Employees Association MOU that you approved in January, we did two things with regards to salary. One is we provided a 3% cost of living increase, and that was in recognition of the increases in cost of living and the fact that this group had not had raises in many years due to the Great Recession that we've all experienced. In addition to that, we want to continue to move towards employees contributing to the employer portion, the employer share of our retirement packages. And so we provided a 1% raise in addition to the 3% raise, but employees picked up another 1% of the cost of the employer share of our pension costs. And so the take home for the employee is only the 3%. The 1% is basically a pass-through into the retirement package. And we want to try to move towards a higher level of contribution. And so that happened for the St. Helena Employees Association members, and I'm asking that that same pass-through happen with the mid-managers and the executive managers. And so we're offering a 1% raise, but it'll turn around and they will make an additional 1% contribution towards their pension packages. I did speak with our mid-managers and our executive staff. We value our St. Helena Employees Association members very much. They were here during the recession. Many of us were not. They are the boots on the ground. They are the individuals who are out there providing direct services, doing great work for the citizens of St. Helena. And it was very important to this team that they were secured their raises. And so through a discussion with the mid-managers and the exec staff, everyone has agreed to forego a 3% raise. That technically would be part of the negotiations, so to ensure that compression doesn't happen and that our mid-managers and our exec staff stay at market and are competitive, and we can not only attract them, but now that we have attracted such a great team, that we're able to keep them at market and retain them. But this entire group unanimously agreed to forego that raise. One, first to ensure that council was able to provide the raises to SHIA. We would ask that you consider those raises again when we prepare the 16-17 budget. To determine if funds are available for both of these groups, actually three now. But for this time period, we've agreed to forego, or they've agreed to forego those raises. I really want to recognize that group for this. We are competitive, but we are not overly competitive. There are salaries that are below sort of that mid-market range, and so that's something we do need to look at the future. But for right now, I'm really proud of the mid-managers and the executive staff for foregoing that raise. I did also want to point out, as the staff report states, that the mid-managers also agreed to forego a 1% raise in the prior year, that SHIA was given a 1% raise with a 1% contribution, or 2% raise with a 1% contribution. We gave the mid-managers that raise. They made that same contribution, but SHIA received a 1% raise that was a take-home raise, and the managers agreed to forego that as well. And so you've seen really a lot of teamwork and a strong support from our management team for our St. Helena Employees Association members. The second item was we had an exec staff retreat prior to the city manager's goal-setting session, and we talked about our role in this community and how important our connection is with this community. And we brought it up during the goal-setting session that many of us are not privileged to be able to live in this beautiful community, although we're trying to feel connected to it and we want to be a part of this community. We're just not able to live here. And so in an effort to be better connected, I came up with an idea that if employees, if mid-managers and exec staff were interested in attending charity events, which is a great way to be in the community, to support our charities, to meet people and to be connected with our community, that up to $750 a year in only the employee's ticket, not spouses, not family, not friends, just one ticket, up to $750 a year would be reimbursed by the city, would be on their time, their travel time, no vehicle reimbursements, no nothing, but just the cost of the actual ticket so that staff as well could participate in some of these events. Those are the only two changes from normal course of business. The total cost for this package for the remainder of this fiscal year is, I lost it here, $52,000. The total cost for the 15-16 budget will be $15,000. It's estimated to be around $15,000, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, are there any initial questions?
So we do not have an unrepresented compensation package today, or this is a new resolution, or it's a new program altogether?
It's all together, so it's basically putting together all the things that have either been provided to these two groups over time, things that have been approved through various actions or in various policies, but there's no program that exists today. So this is a compiling
attempt to
of all
formalize it.
Correct, and it
where
formalizes it.
Where would this live? In what document or?
In this document. So the document that's attached to the staff report,
Yep.
you see an unrepresented compensation program resolution, Exhibit A.
Yep.
That will then be, it's similar to an MOU, but we don't call it a memorandum of understanding because they're not a represented group. So it's referred to as an unrepresented compensation program resolution. And so that would then be provided to new employees and will then live in our policy manual.
Okay.
Just one quick point. If you look at fiscal impact, I may have misheard you. I thought you said 52,000, but it's 5,200.
5,200, yes.
5,200.
Add a little extra zero there.
You're optimistic.
With an estimated 3,200 from the general fund and the remaining
Yes.
from other funds. And then the next fiscal year, the annual cost is estimated to be 15,600.
600, yes.
So just different.
Does that include the proposed reimbursable amount for events?
At the full amount. So if everybody used the full amount, yes.
Then that's in that 15,000. Okay. And does that exist for represented employees today?
No.
Okay, so that's something we would implement for both unrepresented and represented?
No, it's only under consideration for the mid-managers and the exec staff.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead, Mr. Thorne.
How does an individual who works for our city obtain the great distinction of becoming a mid-manager? Is a mid-manager somebody who manages other people, or are there other distinctions? I'm not clear how that title is obtained. I have other questions regarding that, but maybe you can answer that one first.
So basically, positions have been identified to be under certain categories. So there's actual legal criteria when you look at different classifications of exempt and non-exempt. So these are exempt based on their work duties and responsibility. Legally, it's been determined that they are exempt employees, so they do not receive overtime. And that's really the distinction. So our mid-managers are given certain responsibilities. Many of them manage staff, but that's not a necessary criteria for the mid-manager position, but they are exempt and therefore are mid-managers.
When they're hired by the city, who makes that determination, what classification they will fit in? For example, a water coordinator or grants manager. I know they may manage other people. I'm not sure if they do or not, but is there something unique about your position where you say, no, that's a mid-manager level position? Who has that discretion?
So it's between myself, the Human Resources Director, and the director of that department to determine what the job responsibilities are. And then again, based on the legal requirements, we decide, yes, this position is an exempt position because it has these certain, for example, exempt positions often have criteria of having independent decision-making and certain responsibilities that don't fall under a non-exempt employee. And we decide really what the level of that position, what is that individual going to do? We build a job description around that, and we determine the classification at that time. And then that's what we recruit for, and that person is then hired under that recruitment.
Okay. So if we were to compare these mid-managers as they're stated in this list here, that would be roughly equivalent to other cities, or would it be totally different depending on the?
They're generally the same. You'll have some different titles. Again, it's not, when you look at the legal termination, it's not about title. It's actually, you can call anybody anything you want. It's about physically what's their work assignment. That's why it's always really hard to do some of those comparisons, because we all call things differently until usually you get to the director level. Someone may call something an assistant, and it may be a secretary in another organization, or it's a manager, or whatever that may be. But they're generally in the same, analysts are generally in the same arena. It just sort of depends. But we try to, in government, we try to sort of stay with some more general terms, titles.
Thank you.
Okay, any other initial questions?
Yeah, I have one on the charity-based events. I think I get this, but the idea is to not treat this as an expense, because we want our employees to be there as a member of the community and enjoying the event versus working at it where they would expense it. Is that part of the rationale? Because if not, then couldn't this just be treated through an expense reimbursement? I
have never authorized expense reimbursements for charity events. I don't feel that I have the authority to do that. And so if we attend charity events, we have all paid for that through our own pockets, basically. It's not a business expense. And so this would then basically, that's exactly what that is it makes it into a business expense for the, again, just for the employee, not for any additional expenses related to that.
Okay, because it does have, I mean, what you're proposing, there's a stipulation that it has to directly benefit the St. Helena community in some way, shape, or form.
That seemed appropriate to me.
So it really is so that our employees can go and represent. This isn't necessarily a perk. It's just saying, if you're going to go there for the benefit of the city, we're going to reimburse you through this mechanism.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to be clear about that.
That's really what it is. It's a reimbursement. That's correct.
Okay.
Is there an annual estimated cost associated with that part of your recommendation, the $750 roughly?
If everyone were to use...
Maybe it's in there, I didn't see that.
It's not. If everyone were to use the entire $750, which is probably unlikely, the total cost would be around $14,000.
Okay.
So that seems high if the impact 016, 017 is 15.6, or that's not, is that included in the 15.6 in our fiscal impact summary here?
It should be, yes.
So the other is it's less than $2,000?
Right, but he's saying if it's 14, it's about 1,000. It's not, I can't answer that.
Okay.
Okay, let me open this up to public comment. Is there any public comment on this? Let me close the public hearing. Is there any further council discussion? And the chair would invite a motion to adopt the recommendation of staff with respect to this item.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Black?
Councilmember Pitts?
Yes.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. That takes us to our last item, I think. Residential Growth Management Update. This is an informational item coming from Mr. Hausch, and it's an informational item that's been missed for some number of years, so it's always good to get back on track.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you well know, the city has a growth management system that limits the number of building permits that can be issued in any 1 year for new residential units to 9 maximum. Not all newly built units are included in this limit. There are some exemptions for replacement homes. So if a home is completely demolished and replaced, it doesn't get counted as a new unit. Second units are exempt, and affordable housing units are not classified in that limitation. According to the ordinance, allocations are issued on January 1st of each year on a first approved, first issued basis Permits that are not issued, so if there's any left, may be banked into the next year. However, these banked units are only available for projects that include 40% of the total unit count for affordable projects or affordable units. So Magnolia Oaks is an example of a subdivision that was approved using this methodology. There's 45 total units in that subdivision, 18 of which are designated as affordable units with restricted maximum rents or sale prices, and 27 of them are market rate. The growth management ordinance also requires an annual update in September. And as you mentioned, Mayor, this has not occurred since 2012, so we're playing a little bit of catch-up tonight. So obviously it's not September, but we just wanted to bring this forward. The last growth management update did occur in 2012, and in that presentation it was identified that there were 70 banked or rollover units and 9 available for 2012, so a total of 79 were available during that last update. Since that time, 46 building permits for new residential units have been issued, leaving 60 banked allocations or allotments currently available. And we have not issued any for 2016, so there are essentially 9 additional for market rate developments currently in 2016. Just to point out, there are some obvious need for revisions with the ordinance. The fact that we're supposed to issue them on January 1st, which is a city holiday, and city staff would not be in the office in order to do so.
You would take the day off and or come back in, actually.
That's right.
Take the vacation day, come back in, right?
Just to issue allocations, that's right. But so there's just a little bit of cleanup that's needed for staff to be able to administer this program. We're not proposing any changes now. We will be bringing back some of those changes given current staff direction. We'll maybe intend to bring that back in September with the update, but we don't have a schedule for when that's happening. And so currently, if a new residence was proposed, we would identify that in any approval process with the planning commission or council and recommend that they be issued an allotment on a first come, first approved basis. But that's currently how staff would like to administer it, given the limitations of the current language. There is a summary table in the staff report which identifies kind of how some of the math was provided with regards to existing units and available units. Any changes to the ordinance would be required to go before the Planning Commission for review and City Council for action. There are no anticipated or unanticipated fiscal impacts for administering the growth management program. It's a typical part of our day-to-day activities in the department. And so with that, staff just wanted to provide you the information. We're available for any questions, but essentially felt it was important to bring this forward since there had been a lapse in the information provided for both the public and the commission or the council. And we did present this to the Planning Commission as well.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I understand how it all works. So each year there are 9 unrestricted permits. Once those are all used, then you get into the rollover. But to use the rollover, if it were a market rate, it would have to be within a project that has the 40% affordable requirement, right?
That's
the only
accurate.
way to dip into that sort of rollover reserve, right?
That's exactly right.
So in 2014, when there were 25 permits issued, 14 of those were within a project that had 40% affordable. For that number to have been used, right?
That's correct.
It must have been. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
I believe that is Magnolia Oaks.
Yeah, makes sense.
Sure.
Makes sense. Okay.
Any further questions?
Following up on Greg's point, with respect to the development, is there a minimum size development that would have to qualify for the 40%?
It doesn't
It could be
stipulate.
4 units, basically, and 2 of them are, one of them.
So the math would have to be, it would have to be 40% of the proposal. So if it's a 10-unit subdivision, 4 would have to be low income. That's correct.
Okay. And is there a need to tie this somehow legally to our general plan update? Or is it with respect to the anticipated 2% and the 9 restricted units per year? Are they sort of dovetailed together?
Well, this ordinance was, when it was originally adopted, was intended to provide for a 2% growth rate, which was, I would anticipate, built into the projections of the general plan at the time, or or at least understood some of the housing element projections. If we were to get into a situation where our growth rates were predicted to be above a certain level, and we may get into a situation where we could not provide the housing to meet the growth rates based on the limitations of this ordinance. It was originally approved at 14 units, and it was subsequently restricted down to 9.
Okay, thanks.
So when we talk about that 2% growth rate, are we basing that on, in this case, the number of existing residential units in the community?
Given my limited knowledge, I would say it would either be based on residential units or number of residents, and then projected based on average residents per household.
Okay.
There might be an answer to that in one of the old housing elements.
Right.
Exactly. I haven't done this. Our research was primarily just focused on getting the numbers accurate, bringing it up to date. I've seen some references to how the ordinance was adopted, obviously the ordinance itself, but I have not done a lot of research on kind of the thought process that went into it.
Yeah, I'm just curious if that 2% really reflects reality. And if it doesn't, should we look into changing that?
So the updated general plan will have all of those, the growth projections built into it, as does the housing element.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay.
I assume that if there are any substantive changes to the ordinance that you're recommending, it would run through the planning commission first.
Yes. And we can look at, when we look at updating this, we will tie it to growth projections provided by ABAG, housing element, all of those things. But right now, staff just wanted to kind of do some catch up to get it out, since it had been 4 years, or close to 4 years since it had been discussed.
That's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Did I open this for public comment? Not yet. Is there any public comment on this one? I'll close the public comment. Is there any further discussion? I think we've probably pretty much exhausted it. So with that, I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, members of the public.